Hey, welcome to the Gaming Bench. Today I'm building an ancient Korean game called Nyout. It's a race game for 2 to 4 players. If you've never heard of it or you want to learn more about it, I have another video that covers the rules, history, and strategy of the game. I'll link that down in the description. Okay, let's get to it. Normally when I start a project, I already have all my wood cut to size because I think watching people mill up lumber on YouTube is really boring. But this project has some techniques that are new to me, and I thought it would be interesting to watch me figure them out in real time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I glued together this piece of walnut, and Nyout is round. The board is going to be round, so I'm going to cut this into a circle on my table saw. I built a really simple jig to make this happen. So this is just a sled, it's got on a track, and there's a nail in the middle of this that allows this to rotate. And if YouTube is to be believed, I can just cut corners off of this around and around and around until it is a circle. So let's give it a try. It worked pretty well. It's not perfectly smooth, but that's okay because I think I'm going to put a profile on this piece before it's all done. All right, cool. All right, with this thing cut into a circle, now I can start planning out the spaces. So Nyout has a bigger space on the 4 cardinal points and then some smaller spaces that connect them around. And I'm going to inlay a different color wood into those spots. So I still have the horizontal and vertical lines from when this was square and I was trying to find the circle. So I'll cut those in half into 45s. And honestly, when I was mapping this out, my plan at first was to evenly space the dots between the big cardinal points, but that didn't look quite right visually because the cardinal points are larger spaces. It made the smaller dots look a little off. Since that didn't look right, I decided to just lean into it and space the dots out in a more artistic way, I guess. They're not evenly spaced, but I think at the end of the day, the entire impression is pretty cool. So I laid out a bunch of green tape dots so I had an idea of how the finished board would look. This is the top, and I don't know if this is a controversial design decision, but I oriented it so that the sapwood goes through at an angle on the board instead of matching up with the horizontal and vertical lines. I really debated how to do that. Right, that I think it's a little more expected if it matched the horizontal or vertical line. I think this is maybe a little more artistic. What it finally came down to is I asked my oldest what he thought about it, because he's currently studying video game design in college, and his input was that if I had the heartwood match one of these lines, it puts a lot of visual importance on that line. And that's not the intent, right? There's nothing more important about the horizontal line or the vertical line. So that's why I decided to go with this. In addition, I think it'll look a little more visually interesting. So I'm going to inlay all of these dots. I have a variety of exotic woods here. Haven't really decided what's best. I may go with just maple because it's bright white and I think it'll have the best contrast to this walnut. but I may experiment with some other, like this purple heart or even this zebra wood, to see if we can give maybe some of these bigger dots an interesting look. First thing I'm going to do is drill out all these smaller holes. Make sure the bit's lined up right. All right, once again, drill press for the win. I keep thinking I should have bought one of these a long time ago because this makes my life so much easier. Next, I'll drill these bigger holes, and I'm a little nervous about this because the only bit I have that's big enough, this is 5/8, is this spade bit. And I got to be really careful because if I drill too deep, the point is going to go right through the back of this board, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I want to avoid it if I can. So let's see what I can do. There's a little bit of shake in it, so I'm going to actually clamp this down before I drill it. Okay. Yeah, I was afraid of that. I'm not going to be able to reach the center point on the table saw, so I guess I'm going to have to do it by hand. So I bought this drill guide gizmo a couple years ago in lieu of buying a drill press, and I gotta say I'm not that impressed. There seems like there's a fair amount of deflection for something that's supposed to be keeping your drill straight. That said, I think I do trust it more than just trying to freehand this. So let's see how this goes. All right, happy with that. And I managed not to bust out the back on any of those. Cool. I bought a set of plug cutters to make the inlay a little bit easier. And this is the 3/8 plug, which is the size of the smaller holes on the board. It's pretty cool. All you need to do is take a screwdriver and pop them out, and I should have some perfectly sized inlay for the holes that I drilled. So as it turns out, not perfectly sized. They need just a little bit of sanding, not too much, but just with a little bit of glue. And a little bit of persuasion. Yeah, works pretty well. So I cut plugs for the bigger pieces in the same way, but I want to do a little additional inlay on these to make them stand out a little bit more. So I use my center finder to find the center of all of them before I glue them in. The hole is really shallow because I didn't want to drill through the back of this board, and I'm concerned that this is really going to seat right, but I guess we'll see. I'm afraid that once I take the sander to these to smooth everything out, these bigger pieces are just going to pop right out. There's only one way to find out. We are once again at the trust the process part of the project because I think this looks pretty terrible right now with all my pencil lines on it, with all of this inlay at different heights before I sand it down. But I'm going to keep going. So this is dried overnight, so all this glue should be nice and firm. I'm going to do an extra inlay in these cardinal points. So I'll take this back to the drill press. Yeah, I was afraid of that. The hole was so shallow that this inlay just split off. Maybe this isn't going to work. All right, so I drilled those out so I can cut new plugs and put them in there and just start over. All right, I glued these plugs back in. Looks fine, and now's the time to try to sand everything down. These stand up kind of high, so I'm going to try to bring them down a little bit with my flush cut saw, and we'll see how this works. Okay, now all that's left is a whole lot of sanding. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I started pretty aggressive with 80 grit, and then I brought it up to 220. Looks okay. Doesn't look perfect. I mean, it's far from perfect, but it's okay. Feels pretty smooth. I'm really pleased that none of these really thin veneers essentially popped off during the sanding process. So sanded that top and bottom. And next, I think I'm gonna put a profile along this edge just to make it look a little fancier. Turns out I don't really have a profile bit that I like for doing this edge, so I went ahead and ordered one. It's gonna take a couple days to get to me, so in the meantime, let's move on to making the dice. The dice for Nyout are essentially casting sticks, like I've made before for a game like Senate, but Nyout dice are, instead of being long reeds like this, they're short and stubby. So still flat on one side and curved on the other. So to make these, I just got a 3/4 inch dowel rod and ran it partially through my table saw to flatten one end, and then I just need to cut these into sections. The resources I have say that the dice are about 1 inch long, and in the illustrations, well, one illustration that I found of the dice, it appears that the one side of the dice is cut at an angle and the other side is flat. I'm not sure about that. That could be just poor perspective on the drawing, but I'm going to do it anyways because I think it makes a really nice looking piece. This is some sample pieces I cut. This is too short. This is about what I think I'm going to go for. So all I'm going to do is cut off this scrap and then cut this up into sections on my miter saw. All right, I have all the pieces cut and I just soften the edges with a little bit of sanding. These pieces are traditionally white on the flat side and black on the curved side, and they're made black through charring. So that means it's time to break out the torch. All right, thankfully it's warmed up enough that I can do this outside and not have to worry about burning down my shop. So I might have gone a little overboard with the torch. I wanted to get a good char on it, so it was definitely black, but the edges didn't want to really get that black, and I think I probably kept the torch on it for too long. Now it's definitely blackened, but the real question is, can I get it so that you don't have soot all over your hands every time you pick up the dice? So I'm going to try to sand this, even it out a little bit, and then I'm going to cover it with, I think, some polyurethane to see if that seals it and makes it easy to handle. And if not, there's always the option to just paint it, which is where my head was at first. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely white on one side and black on the other. Ugh. All right, this turned out pretty good. After a couple coats of polyurethane, it's not leaving black on my hands, so I hot glued the 4 pieces I'm going to use to this board. Found out the hard way that super glue accelerant is flammable, so hot glue this time. And it also elevates these just a little bit off the board, so maybe I can get a good char on the ends without heating it up too much. And yeah, yesterday it was 60, and today there's snow on the ground. Thanks, Ohio. The wind is not helping this situation. That worked pretty well. The char isn't consistent across the whole piece or all the pieces, but I think that's okay. I think it adds to the effect. So I'm just going to give these a light sanding to try to knock off some of the soot, some of the char. Three coats of polyurethane later, and these look pretty good. They feel nice. I gave them a quick sanding of ultrafine sandpaper, And I gotta say, I really like how the char doesn't extend the whole way on some of the pieces. Makes it look much more handmade. And I'll tell you, I was concerned that these wouldn't really throw randomly, but they seem to. And this, if it happens, counts as black. All right. So next up is finishing the board. I'm excited to get this done because I want to try something different. I bought Osmo Poly-X oil wax. I've never used this before, but it's supposed to give a really nice finish. So let's see how it goes. I'm wearing gloves because the videos I've watched have said that this stuff is put near impossible to get off your hands once it dries. And I tend to be kind of sloppy about these things, so I'm going to try to be careful with this. So the only instructions are stir thoroughly and apply a very thin coat. So I'm going to do both those things. I'm applying with a foam brush. So let's see how this goes. Okay, spent a lot of time working this in, making sure I got a good thin coat, especially around the edge. I want to make sure it didn't pull up around this beaded detail. Oh, and by the way, I put a beaded detail around the edge off camera. So this has to dry for, I think, 8 to 10 hours. So I'm going to leave it alone and then come back tomorrow and see if it needs a second coat. I ended up putting a second coat of the hard wax oil on this. Not sure that it needed it. I am really happy with the way the board turned out. I think angling the grain in this direction was a good call, and I used satin oil wax on this, and it gives it a really nice sheen that I like. If you're curious, the reason this one point is a different color than all the others is because this indicates the starting point. You come in here, go the whole way around the board. If you want to learn more about how to play Nyout, I have another video that talks about the rules, history, and strategy of that. I'll link that down in the description below. The dice turned out really nice, and for playing pieces, I'm just going to use these glass beads. Even though I'm done with building the board and the pieces, there is one more element that goes with Nyout that I haven't built yet. And in many ways, this is the thing that I was most excited about. The literature talks about this anti-cheating device that the Koreans used. But this video is getting long, so I'm going to break it out into its own video. Look for that soon. If you've watched this far, I'm going to guess you're already a subscriber, but if you're not, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel. For my regular subscribers, you might have noticed that I've changed up my posting schedule. I was posting every other week with both a build and a history video, but moving forward, I'm going to be posting every week with build, then history, then build, then history, and so on. Mostly because the YouTube algorithm really wants you to post every week, and if I'm ever going to start making those fat YouTube stacks, I got to make the algorithm happy. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Gaming Bench.